I have seen this before. I have watched it unfold across more seasons than you have years. I have observed it in the courts of the powerful and the silence of the forgotten. I have witnessed the precise moment when the ones who moved against someone they should have left alone realized, too late, always too late, that they had not made a calculation. They had made a mistake. And the difference between a calculation and a mistake is this: a calculation can be adjusted. A calculation has variables that can be rerun, outcomes that can be revised, positions that can be updated as new information arrives. A calculation is a living thing. It breathes. It adapts. A mistake does not adapt. A mistake simply is. It sits in the record permanently. It does not soften with time or become something more flattering with the right framing. It remains exactly what it was in the moment it was made, an error in judgment so fundamental that no amount of subsequent maneuvering can reclassify it as something more dignified. They made a mistake when they moved against you. Not a tactical error. Not a miscalculation in the timing or the execution. Not the kind of mistake that could have been avoided with slightly better information or slightly more patience. A foundational mistake. The kind that lives at the base of everything that followed and contaminates every structure built on top of it. The kind that, once identified, explains every inconsistency that accumulated above it. The kind that does not announce itself all at once but surfaces slowly, in pieces, until one day the full shape of it becomes unmistakable. They misread what you were. That is the mistake. That is the whole mistake. Everything else, every action taken, every alliance formed, every story constructed, every resource directed at your containment, was downstream of that single foundational error. They looked at you and they saw something manageable. They were wrong. And now we are in the season where that wrongness resolves into the only outcome it was ever capable of producing. Your rise. Let me tell you how it happened. Not the surface version, not the version that lives in whatever story they have been telling since the day they decided you were something less than what you are. I want to tell you the true version. The version that begins at the root. There was a moment when you became visible to them in a way that was inconvenient. Not because you did anything aggressive. Not because you sought conflict or position or the kind of recognition that requires the diminishment of someone else to feel significant. You became visible simply by being what you are, fully, consistently, without the performance of smallness that the spaces around you had come to expect and depend upon. Something in your presence, your movement, your quality of existing in the world around them produced a specific discomfort in specific people. And specific people who experience specific discomfort do one of two things. They examine the discomfort and ask what it is telling them about themselves. Or they direct the discomfort outward and make it someone else's problem. The people who moved against you chose the second path. Because the first path requires a level of self-honesty that was not available to them. Because sitting with the specific discomfort that your presence produced and following it honestly to its source would have required them to confront something they had spent significant energy constructing elaborate defenses against. That confrontation was not something they were prepared to undertake. So instead, they identified you as the source of the discomfort rather than the mirror of it. They decided that what needed to change was not their interior but your exterior. That the problem was not what your existence was revealing about theirs but simply your existence itself, in its undimmed, unmanaged, inconvenient form. That decision, the decision to make you the problem rather than examine the problem your presence was surfacing, was the moment the mistake was made. Everything that followed was consequence. You need to understand something about the nature of what they were afraid of, because it lives at the center of everything that was aimed at you, and understanding it changes how you see every season you have walked through since that moment. They were not afraid of what you had done. They were afraid of what you were going to do. The attacks, the stories, the coordinated distance, the quiet campaigns to reshape how you were perceived in the spaces you both occupied. None of that was a response to something you had actually done. It was a preemptive strike against something they could see coming that they could not afford to let arrive. They saw the trajectory. They understood, even if they never articulated it this clearly to themselves, that what you were building, who you were becoming, was going to eventually occupy a position that made their own position visible for what it was. And their position was built on a foundation that could not withstand the comparison. So they moved. Not because you were a present threat, because you were a future one. And future threats, to people who have built their safety on keeping things exactly as they are the most terrifying kind. Because you cannot point to a future threat and say this is what was done to justify what I am doing. You have to work in the language of anticipation and prevention, and the carefully disguised violence of people who convince themselves that what they are doing is defense when it is simply fear made operational. They moved against the future version of you, a version that had not yet arrived. And here is the devastating irony of that move. Here is the specific, exquisite justice that lives at the center of their mistake. In moving against the future version of you, they created the conditions that produced it. Every attempt to compress you deepened your roots. Every coordinated effort to diminish you clarified your understanding of who you were dealing with and what you were navigating. Every story told to keep you contained became data, precise, detailed, actionable data about the specific people willing to do specific things in specific circumstances. Every season of pressure that was aimed at preventing your rise was building the exact architecture of character and resilience and refined understanding that a person needs to rise in a way that lasts. They built you. Not intentionally. Not generously. Not in any way that they would ever claim credit for. But functionally, mechanically, unavoidably, the pressure they applied, the seasons of difficulty they produced, the specific qualities that the survival of everything they aimed at you required you to develop, all of that is now part of what you are. And what you are now is not what they calculated when they decided to move. You are the version of yourself that was forged in the exact conditions they designed. Which means you are the version they never prepared for. Because you cannot prepare for the outcome you yourself produced. Because the scenario they were trying to prevent was the scenario their actions made inevitable. Because the future version of you they were trying to stop was quietly becoming more powerful with every single effort they made to contain the version they could see. This is the nature of their mistake. This is why it is foundational and not tactical. They did not miscalculate the timing or the method or the specific approach. They miscalculated the subject. And when you miscalculate the subject, nothing else in the equation can correct for it. You can refine every other variable with perfect precision and the answer will still be wrong because the number you put in at the beginning was wrong. They put in the wrong number. They put in a version of you that did not correspond to what you actually were. And every action taken based on that wrong number produced results that corresponded to the wrong number rather than to you. The stories they told were stories about someone who did not exist. The positions they took were positions against the person who had never been what they described. The victory they celebrated was a victory over a version of you that was never real. And you have been here all along. Real. Undiminished. Continuing. I want to speak now about what the rise looks like from the inside because it is important that you understand it correctly. Not the way it looks from outside, not the visible, documented, observable evidence of your ascent that the wrong people are now watching with the specific sick feeling of people who understand too late what they participated in. That is real and it is significant, but it is not where the rise lives. The rise lives inside first. It lives in the moment, and it may have happened recently or it may have happened long ago in a season you have already moved past, when something shifted in the quality of your relationship with your own sense of worth. When you stopped measuring it against their assessment. When the quiet, persistent voice that had been running a background calculation in your mind, the one that was always checking whether the story they were telling about you might have some truth in it, always re-examining whether the distance people were creating was perhaps warranted, always looking for the version of events in which you were the problem, because if you were the problem then you had agency, then you could fix it, then the situation could be resolved. When that voice finally went quiet, not because you silenced it through force of will, because you no longer believed the premise, because something in you arrived at a knowing that was not dependent on being confirmed by anyone outside yourself. A knowing that did not require the people who had doubted you to revise their position. A knowing that did not need to win an argument or correct a record or prove anything to anyone operating from a version of events that was never accurate. A knowing that was simply true the way the ground is true beneath your feet. You are not what they said you were. You never were. That knowing, settled, quiet, unperformable, impossible to fake because it produces a quality of stillness that is distinct from every performance of confidence you have ever witnessed. That is the interior of the rise. That is the foundation on which everything visible is being built. That is the specific thing they could not attack with any of the tools they had available because it lives in a place none of their tools could reach. They can attack your reputation. They cannot attack your knowing. They can shape the perceptions of people who were never close enough to see you clearly. They cannot shape your own perception of yourself once it is settled into truth. They can construct stories. They cannot construct the version of you that exists when no one is watching, in the private hours, in the interior of a life that is being lived in alignment with what you actually are. That version is untouchable. And it is from that untouchable place that everything you are building is being built. Now I want to tell you about the outside of the rise because it is already happening and you may not be giving it the full recognition it deserves. Look at what is different. Look at who has arrived in your proximity in this season who was not there in the season before. Look at the quality of what is beginning to open, not with the strained, conditional quality of opportunities that came when you were still compressed and still operating within the limitations of spaces that did not fully welcome what you were, but with a different quality altogether. An easier quality. A quality that feels proportional in a way that previous things did not. This is what the outside of the rise looks like. It does not always announce itself with drama. In fact, it rarely does. The most real and durable rises do not arrive with fanfare. They arrive the way the tide arrives, consistently, gradually, without asking anyone's permission, covering ground that was previously uncovered and staying. The tide does not announce itself. It simply rises. You are in the middle of a tide, and the people who were counting on the shore to stay dry are already wet. There is something specific I want to name about the people who are watching this happen. There are two categories, and the distinction between them matters for how you move through what is coming. The first category is the ones who organized. These are the people who were conscious participants in what was directed at you. They knew what they were doing. They made choices with information that made those choices deliberate. They are not confused about their role. They may be confused about the outcome, deeply, uncomfortably, increasingly confused, but not about their participation. For these people, what is happening right now is not a dawning realization. It is a reckoning they have been trying to defer. They have been managing the timeline, attempting to control the rate at which the truth surfaces, working to stay ahead of the unraveling that they understood was possible from the moment the outcome they expected did not arrive. They are exhausted. Not the exhaustion of people who have worked hard and earned their rest. The exhaustion of people who have been maintaining a lie under escalating pressure for a long time and can feel the maintenance becoming unsustainable. The exhaustion of someone who has been holding a door closed against something that is simply going to come through the door. The door is coming through. They know it. They are not sleeping well. They are not moving through their days with the ease of people whose position is solid. They are checking what you are doing, what you are saying, who you are talking to, what is becoming visible about your life that was not visible before. Checking because they need to know where you are in the sequence, how close the moment of full visibility is, because they have things they still want to move before that moment arrives. You do not need to do anything about this. You do not need to accelerate their reckoning or position yourself to be present for their exposure or say anything that moves the timeline. The timeline is moving. It does not need your hand on it. What it needs from you is continued motion in the forward direction. Continued building. Continued investment of your attention in the things that are real and present and aligned with what this season is opening for you. Every day you spend building is a day the distance between you and what they organized increases. Every day you spend focused on what is arriving rather than what is past is a day that truth closes more of the gap between where it is and where it needs to be visible. The second category is the ones who did not know. These are the people in the outer ring, the ones who accepted the story about you not because they had any reason to question it, but because the source of the story carried authority they had not yet learned to interrogate. They distanced themselves from you or treated you with the particular cool reserve of someone who has been quietly told to be careful, without ever being told the full reason why. These people are waking up. The process of their waking is not the same as the process of the first category's reckoning. It does not have the quality of someone being found out. It has the quality of someone recognizing, with a mixture of clarity and discomfort, that they were used. That their good faith was directed by someone else toward a purpose they would not have consented to if they had understood what the purpose actually was. Some of them are already in the process of correction. Some of them are having private conversations right now, conversations you are not part of and may never hear about directly, in which they are comparing their private sense that something was always off with the new information that is surfacing and finding that the two things align in a way that resolves in your direction. They are not your enemies. They are people who were handed a map that had your location marked wrong. They navigated according to the map. The map was inaccurate. And now they are beginning to discover that the terrain does not match what they were shown. Some of them will reach out to you directly. Some of them will simply change the way they speak about you in rooms you are not in. Some of them will do nothing visible but carry a private correction that shapes how they operate going forward. All of these are forms of restoration, and all of them are happening without your direction. The truth is doing this work. The truth has always been doing this work. It was simply doing it underground, at a pace that felt invisible, in ways that could not be seen from the surface of the situation. The surface is breaking now, and what is coming through is not what was planted. I want to speak to you about something that the season you are entering requires of you specifically. Something that the version of yourself that exists right now is capable of in a way that the version who entered the previous season was not. Full inhabitation. I mean this precisely. The previous season, the compressed season, the season of pressure and isolation and operating within limitations that were not of your own design, required a particular management of yourself. A careful positioning of your energy. A conservation born of necessity, because the environment was not safe for the full expression of what you are, and the full expression of what you are in an unsafe environment is simply ammunition for the people who are waiting to use it against you. You are right to conserve. You are right to move carefully. You are right to hold the full force of what you are in reserve until the environment warranted its full deployment. The environment is changing. The spaces that are opening for you in this season are not the spaces of before. They do not carry the same embedded hostility. They do not have the same invisible architecture of people positioned to use your authenticity as evidence of the story they were telling about you. They are genuinely different spaces, populated by genuinely different people, operating on genuinely different terms. And in these spaces, conservation is not wisdom. In these spaces, holding yourself back is not strategy. In these spaces, the careful, diminished, edge-softened version of yourself that learned to navigate hostile territory is not what the situation calls for. What the situation calls for is you. The full version. Unmanaged. Uncurated for the comfort of people who needed you small. Unfiltered by the accumulated habit of moving carefully through spaces that did not welcome your full size. This is the invitation of the rise. Not just the external evidence of your ascent, not just the visible markers of things opening and arriving and recognizing what you are, but the internal permission to occupy the full dimension of yourself without apology, without the edge-softening habit, without the conserving management of a person who learned that being too fully themselves was dangerous. It is no longer dangerous. It is the exact thing the season is calling for. The throne does not require you to make yourself smaller to sit in it. The throne was built for the full dimension of the person it belongs to. And the throne that belongs to you is built for someone who has been through exactly what you have been through and arrived at exactly what you have arrived at. Sit in it fully. Not as performance. Not as the declaration of a victory that requires witnesses to feel real. But as the simple, settled, completely unself-conscious occupation of the place that has always been yours. Let me tell you about the mistake one final time. Not from the perspective of what it cost you. You know that already. You have lived that already. The accounting of what the mistake cost you in seasons in peace and the particular taxation of navigating something specifically designed to grind you down. You do not need me to enumerate that. You carry it. You have integrated it. It is part of the specific density of what you have become. I want to tell you about the mistake from the perspective of what it cost them. They spent their most powerful currency on an outcome they never produced. Everything they had, the alliances, the credibility, the resources, the social capital that took years to build, the authority that was lent to them by people who trusted them to use it responsibly, all that was directed toward a single purpose. Your diminishment. Your containment. The production of an ending for a story that was never going to end the way they needed it to. And the outcome never came. Which means the currency was spent and the purchase was never made. You cannot get that back. You cannot recover the credibility deployed on a wrong position and have it returned as credibility. You cannot retrieve the alliances fractured in the service of a campaign that failed and find them intact. You cannot reclaim the years spent monitoring and maintaining and managing a lie and have them return as years available for building something true. They are gone. And what was built with what they had before they spent it all on you, what they could have built, what they could have become, the genuine position they could have occupied if they had simply left you alone and directed their energy toward their own growth rather than the prevention of yours, that version of their lives is gone too. Not because of anything you did to them. Because of the choice they made. The choice to see you as a problem to be managed rather than a force to be respected. The choice to invest in your diminishment rather than their own development. The choice to organize against your future instead of building their own. These were their choices. Made freely. Made with whatever information and maturity and self-awareness was available to them at the time. And choices have consequences that are proportional to the choices themselves, not to the intentions of the people who made them. The consequence of their choices is this moment. You rising. Them watching. The gap between where you are headed and where they are standing increasing with every single day that passes. This is not a moment I want you to spend on satisfaction about their position. Not because satisfaction is unwarranted, it is entirely warranted, but because satisfaction directed at their downfall is still attention directed at them. And they have had enough of your attention. They have taken enough of your energy. They have occupied enough of the interior real estate of your mind across enough seasons that the idea of spending one more unit of your precious, limited, irreplaceable attention on the quality of their experience is something I want to challenge you to resist. Let them watch. You do not need to watch them watching. You have more important things to look at. You have a direction. You have a momentum that is building with the compound force of everything the previous season produced. You have capabilities that were not available to you before the pressure and are only available to you now because of it. You have a clarity about people and situations and the specific texture of genuine versus perform that is the direct result of having been tested by the sophisticated version of both. You have what it took to survive what was aimed at you. And now you have a world that is responding to what the survival produced. There is a particular kind of morning that comes in this season. You will know it when it arrives if it has not arrived already. It is a morning where you wake and there is no residue of the previous season waiting for you in the first moments of consciousness. No low-grade dread. No background calculation of what the day might bring in the way of additional pressure or additional management of someone else's instability or additional navigation of spaces that do not welcome what you are. Just the morning. Just the simple, spacious, unhurried quality of a day that belongs fully to you and to what you are building. This morning comes for the ones who have earned it. Not as a reward distributed by some external judge of what has been sufficiently endured, but as the natural, organic, automatic quality of a life that has shed what needed to be shed and stepped into the open space on the other side. The open space is there. It has been waiting, with the particular patient permanence of things that are genuinely aligned with who you are, for you to step into it without the weight that was piled on you by people who needed you unable to move. The weight is lifting. Not all at once. Weight accumulated over years does not lift in a single moment of revelation. It lifts in layers, in seasons, in the gradual recognition that you are moving more freely than you were, that the decisions feel less complicated than they did, that the landscape around you carries a different quality than the landscape you were navigating before. The weight is lifting and you are rising, and the two of these things are not separate processes. They are the same process. One motion. Continuous. unstoppable now that it has begun. They made a mistake. You rise. These are not two separate statements. They are one statement in two parts. The mistake is not context for the rise. The mistake is the mechanism of the rise. What they intended as containment was construction. What they aimed as diminishment was refinement. What they deployed as pressure was compression in the precise sense of the word, the application of force that does not destroy what it cannot destroy but instead transforms it into something that force alone can no longer affect. You are what the force produced. You are what the mistake built. You are the specific, irreducible, fully formed consequence of every effort made to prevent you from being what you are. And you are still here. Still rising. Still the thing they thought they had already handled. The mistake was theirs. The rise is yours. Walk into it.